Welcome, everyone. This is our monthly webinar. This month, we're going to talk about an integrative approach to gut health and your microbiome. What we're going to cover today is integrative approach in disease versus health balance. We're going to talk about what is the gut. We're going to talk about what does the gut do. We're going to talk about why is gut health important. What is the microbiome? What is leaky gut? How can you treat your gut? How can you test your gut? What can you do today? And cutting edge treatments to help your gut. Any questions that you have as we're doing the webinar, you can just put them in the chat box and we'll get to as many as we can at the end. All right, before we start, what I love is for everyone to put in the chat box what symptoms can be caused by a disrupted microbiome. I'll just give everyone a few seconds to put that in there. All right. So the next thing we're going to talk about here is we're just going to do an overview of integrative medicine. Integrative medicine is like the umbrella under which all types of healing modalities with evidence live. So under the umbrella of integrative medicine is functional medicine, naturopathic medicine, regenerative medicine, conventional medicine, energy healing, massage, cranial sacral therapy, etc. Pretty much anything that has evidence. Now we're going to talk about a 3,500-foot view of disease versus health, which I think is important before we talk about the microbiome. So if you imagine that disease versus health is kind of a seesaw, and on one side you have all your biologic systems, and then on the other side you have your internal and external stressors. So as you can see in this diagram, if your biologic systems are strong enough, then you're going to be healthy. And then if we flip it, and your internal and external stressors are larger than your biologic systems, you're going to be in a state of disease. So here's a list of some of the stressors, but I like to think of it kind of like a bathtub. If you have a big bathtub and you're putting stressors in constantly with water coming in through the bathtub, if at some point you have too many stressors coming in, then your bathtub can handle, and your bathtub is basically your biologic systems, then the bathtub overflows. And what that looks like is disease. So autoimmune disease, infections, heart disease, strokes, you name it. So as long as we have our biologic system stronger than our internal and external stressors, we're going to be in health. So I always want people to have that in the back of their mind as we're talking about everything. And then we'll zoom in a little bit more. We'll talk about the 4 pillars of health. So we have sleep and stress, exercise, and then today we're going to talk about gut health. Nutrition will be a separate topic. So first, let's talk about what is the gut. So the gut, the main organs that we think about the gut is the mouth, the pharynx, the esophagus, the stomach, intestines, rectum, and anus. And then we have a bunch of accessory organs that help supply the gut with digestive enzymes and basically help support digestion. One thing that I think is important to think about when we're thinking about why is the gut so important is that the gut is actually on the outside of the body. So if you imagine a ball, like these balls here, you imagine that there's a cord out middle. The core and the inside is basically on the outside of the ball. So if you imagine if you take that ball on the left and you dip it in blue paint, like the ball on the right, that core on the inside is also going to get dipped in blue. And so that whole core basically represents the gut. From one side, one opening is the mouth and the other opening is the anus. So I want you to kind of keep that in your mind as we're going through this. And then on the inside of the ball, so not the core part, but the other part is basically your body. So you can see that the gut is actually, it's a tube that is kind of on the outside of your body, which will become important when we talk about leaky gut. All right, now we're going to talk about what does the gut do. So the gut does a lot of things. The gut-associated lymphatic tissue is a big portion of our immune system in our entire body. So gut serves like an important function for immunity. It serves as a barrier system. So back to that ball with the core that's kind of on the outside, it helps to prevent the things that we're eating from going inside to our inside of our body. It also protects against antigens and other substances that can get into the blood. Another important function of the gut is energy. So We obviously need to eat in order to have energy and to absorb our nutrients to do all the things we want to do. So our gut serves that super important purpose. About 95% of the body's serotonin is made in the gut. So a lot of people don't realize that serotonin is kind of our happy hormone. A lot of people think that it's made in the brain, but it's actually made in the gut. And so if our gut is unhealthy, it's going to be hard to be happy. Our gut is basically our second brain. So our enteric nervous system is all the nerves that are around our gut, and they connect up to our brain via the vagus nerve. We actually have more nerves in our enteric nervous system than we do in our central nervous system. And there's constant communication going back and forth between our gut and our brain. And so what that means is if you end up riding your bike, crashing and hitting your head and your brain gets inflamed, it's going to send messages down to your gut that's going to inflame your gut. Vice versa, if you eat some bad food, get food poisoning, get an infectious diarrhea type of thing, and that inflames your gut, that's going to send inflammatory messages via the vagus nerve up to your brain. And it's going to cause your brain to be inflamed, which can manifest as anxiety, depression, brain fog, all of those things. So it's super important that we think of our gut as being just an extension of our nervous system, or really a second brain. The vagus nerve has important functions in addition to what's listed here. The vagus nerve also helps with mood regulation. It also helps with cardiac function. So what we found with long haul COVID, for example, a lot of people have developed something called POTS syndrome, and that is kind of an autonomic dysregulation of the vagus nerve. And what we found is by treating the vagus nerve, oftentimes that will go away. And so the vagus nerve is super important in terms of that communication between the gut and the brain. If anything is off with the vagus nerve, it's going to mess up how our gut works. And one thing that a lot of people think about is satiety. So if your vagus nerve is not in balance, it's going to be hard to feel full, and it's going to be easier then to gain weight. And so by getting that into balance, we find that a lot of times people will lose weight because their satiety meter is balanced better. So a better question is probably, what doesn't the gut do? Okay, the next thing we're going to cover is why gut health is important. So if you imagine this is a little drawing schematic of a human in a whole body, that's kind of how I like to think of medicine and treating patients, a holistic view of everything connected. Versus in conventional medicine, we tend to cut it up into different slices. So if you're having something happening with your ears, you go to the ear, nose, and throat doctor. If something is happening with your heart, you go to the cardiologist. If something is happening with your bones, you go to the orthopedic doctor. And we know, though, that it's all connected. And so it's very important. The gut seems to be a foundation for health throughout the body. And part of it, I think, is because of that connection to the brain. So if you have an inflamed brain, that's going to cause messages to go out to the body through the nervous system. That's going to kind of cause everything to be out of balance. Gut problems are really an epidemic. So irritable bowel syndrome, it affects up to 15% of the population. 60% of people have acid reflux, GERD symptoms throughout the year. 30% of people have them throughout the week. Nexium, which is a proton pump inhibitor, which helps to decrease acid in the stomach. In 2010, it was one of the highest grossing pharmaceuticals in the country. So $6.3 billion. So, and three quarters of Americans are obese. So it's clearly an epidemic. Just if we're just looking at the gut symptoms alone, not even talking about how the gut symptoms are causing, or the gut dysregulation is causing other problems. Okay, the next thing we're going to talk about is, what is the microbiome? So the microbiome is 100 trillion organisms from 1,000 different species. So just think about that number for a second. We actually have 10 times more microbes in the human body than cells, and microbes have 100 times more genes than we have in the human genome. So if you think about that, really, we, on a cellular level, we're actually made up more of microbes than we are ourselves, than we are human. And that, if we think about it that way, it kind of helps us to understand why the microbiome is so important. So what does the microbiome do? Microbiome does a lot of different things. It helps to protect ourselves. It helps to regulate the immune system. It helps with so many different things. And when we look at trying to get the body into balance, we like to look at the root cause of what's causing things to be out of balance. What is causing people to have symptoms? So if you think of a tree here, the tree has roots going down into the soil. And we know if the soil is bad, the tree's going to have problems up top. Same idea. We know if the microbiome is out of balance, there's going to be problems throughout our body, and that's going to manifest as all sorts of symptoms, including mental health symptoms, pain, autoimmune chronic illness. And so that's kind of the way we like to look at it, is what is the root cause versus more, my background's emergency medicine, and in a conventional medicine standpoint, we're more looking at, hey, how do we treat the symptoms? And the more I look into this, the more I feel like that's more of a Band-Aid. That's not actually getting to the root cause of what's causing problems. So here's a list of a bunch of different conditions that are directly linked to a disrupted gut microbiome. And there's probably far more, but I just want to note a few of these that you may not think about as much. I mean, all the GI ones people are going to for sure know, but things like Parkinson's, autism, all autoimmune diseases, high cholesterol even is linked to a disrupted microbiome. So for a lot of these conditions, we'll think, oh, okay, you have high cholesterol, we should put you on medicines to decrease your cholesterol. But actually, by getting the microbiome in balance, a lot of times the high cholesterol improves. So that's why with almost all of our patients, we recommend checking the gut microbiome to see if it's in balance or not. And if not, we want to get it in balance as soon as possible. A lot of times people wonder, where the heck did they get their microbiome from in the first place? So we get our genes partially from our mom, partially from our dad, but we actually get 100% of our microbiome from our mom. And we know that babies who are born C-section are more likely to develop allergies and autoimmunity. And part of that is, as babies get delivered initially in a vaginal delivery, that's kind of the first inoculation of the microbiome. And when babies are pulled out C-section, they don't get that. What are some of the factors that influence who or what bugs are living in our gut? So our diet is huge, medications, stress, infections, physical activity, whether it's inactivity or activity. So all those 4 pillars that I talked about at the beginning in terms of exercise, stress, sleep, and diet, those are all going to impact our microbiome. So it's not a quick fix in terms of just taking a pill and then your microbiome is going to be in balance. We really have to look at the whole foundation, what's contributing to the microbiome. And then some things that we can do that kind of drop a nuke on our microbiome. Anytime we take antibiotics, it's certainly going to kill the bad bacteria, which is really important, but it's also going to kill good bacteria. So if we're not doing active measures to make sure that our microbiome stays balanced, it's going to be really harmful to our microbiome. Anytime we get any sort of foodborne illness where we're having diarrhea, vomiting, that is also usually pathogenic, and that's going to cause disruptions in our microbiome. Giardia is something I see a lot. I see a lot of people that do a lot of camping, maybe at some point got a little sick, maybe got treated, maybe didn't. Giardia has these little flagella on it, and so they can kind of swim up and hide in your liver, and it's actually quite difficult to treat. And while you have the Giardia in your system, that's going to cause everything else to be out of balance. H. pylori, a lot of people have heard about that. That's kind of upstream, that lives more in your stomach. And if you have H. pylori, that's also going to cause things downstream to be out of balance. A lot of times people come in looking, for help. Maybe they hurt their shoulder, they want a shoulder injection to feel better. But I think about it as you can't build a bridge in a war zone. So if someone's having shoulder pain and we don't address everything that's happening throughout their body, including their microbiome, it's likely that the injections that we do aren't going to work as well. So I always want to think about, let's get the environment perfect before we do any injections. And a lot of people, if they go ahead and do the injections before addressing other things, will find that they don't work as well. Conversely, a lot of times people will find if they address all these underlying things that are causing inflammation, including a disrupted microbiome, their pain goes away and they're not having any problems. They don't need the injections. Okay, the next thing we're going to move on to is, what is leaky gut? So let's go back again to that little picture that I talked about earlier with the ball with the core in the middle. So that's going to help us to understand why leaky gut is important and how it affects our entire body. So if you imagine that core that we're looking through in the ball is actually your gut from your mouth to your anus, and it's actually on the outside of your body, then you can see that we have a layer of cells. So we have a layer of cells that protects the inside of our body. So if you look at the drawing here, you see where there's the blood vessel there, and then there's all the cells, and then the top part of this drawing indicates everything going through the gut. So that layer of cells, I think of that layer of cells, it should be nice and tight. So if you can see my hands, they should be nice and tight together, protecting that inside of the gut from the inside of the body. What happens for a myriad of reasons, including inflammation, food sensitivities, et cetera, is those cells become a little bit loose. So you can see that in the diagram that the cells on the left side are nice and tight together, and then the ones on the right side start to get loose. And then what happens is some of these different pathogens can get into the bloodstream and cause an inflammatory reaction. So that when they're inflamed as well, you're not going to absorb nutrients as well. And then over time, it kind of becomes this positive feedback where you end up having more challenges. So I think of, if you imagine that you've got a tile floor at home, you can see there's little cracks in it. I think of leaky gut a little bit like that. You want your tile floor to have nice, you want it to have grout in between the tiles that seal the tiles from underneath, from the wood or whatever is underneath. You know, if you have cracks in the grout and then it's getting wet, eventually you're going to get mold underneath. And so the same idea, if we have these cells that are loose, we're going to get stuff seeping in that we don't want to seep in, and it's going to cause problems. Leaky gut, all sorts of things cause leaky gut, as you can see at the top. So stress, toxins, food particles, drugs, pathogens, organ malfunction. But at the end of the day, what's going to happen when you have leaky gut is you end up getting intolerances to food and also to medications. Your immune system becomes out of balance, and then you can develop autoimmunity. So one thing that I think is important to mention is a lot of times people come in and they'll say, oh, I know that I can't eat such and such foods, that I'm allergic to them. So for most people, most food intolerances are related to leaky gut. And once we get the gut back in balance, you can go ahead and eat all those foods again. So I think that's an important thing to think. I think people get a little bit overwhelmed thinking, oh gosh, all these foods I can't eat anymore. But most of the time we can introduce them again once we get your gut permeability down. So once we get those cells nice and tight again. And it's kind of this process where you get that inflammation of the gut lining, which then causes you to not absorb nutrients well, which then causes an immune response, which then causes all these GI issues, which then causes autoimmunity. And so that's why I think of autoimmunity. There's lots of different autoimmune diseases, of course, but I think of it all kind of as being the same, that our immune system is out of balance and we're attacking ourselves. And it might be that we're attacking the myelin sheath if we have multiple sclerosis, or if we have rheumatoid arthritis, maybe we're attacking the cartilage. If we have Hashimoto's, maybe we're attacking our thyroid tissue. But at the end of the day, it's just our immune system is attacking things that it shouldn't be attacking. So if we get our immune system back into balance, then we can reverse autoimmunity. The conventional approach is more to suppress the immune system, which of course we want our immune system to be able to work for us. We just don't want it working against us. All sorts of different disease processes can be caused by leaky gut. And here's just a list. I've already mentioned some of them, but I think other ones that people don't think about as much, again, is because of the gut-brain axis, that leaky gut can cause ADHD, anxiety, depression, headaches, all sorts of things, just decreased immune system. So you get colds a lot, food sensitivities, all sorts of different things that can be caused by leaky gut outside of the gut. We've talked about inflammaging before, and I think it's always important to just bring it up again in the context of whatever we're talking about. And today we're talking about the gut. And anytime we have increased inflammation in our body, it's going to cause us to age faster. And our cells kind of have a limited amount of times that they can divide before they get too damaged, they become these old senescent cells and they can't divide anymore. And that's really kind of what ends up ultimately causing us to die or to not repair different tissues. And so anything that we can do to decrease our inflammation is going to slow down our aging and increase our longevity. Gut is a huge way to decrease our inflammation or to increase it. So if our microbiome is out of balance and we have leaky gut, we're just causing systemic inflammation, which is going to cause inflammaging. So a lot of times when I start working with people on their guts, the first thing we want to do is to start to seal those leaks. So if you imagine that you've got those cells, you've got leaky gut, you've got those cells that aren't as tight as they should be, we're going to want to work at all the underlying things and all the root causes. Why did you develop leaky gut in the first place? But first we want to start sealing it. So back to our tile analogy, imagine if you have a bunch of tiles that are cracked and you know that liquid is leaking down, but you know it's going to be a huge project to pull up all the tiles and redo the tile floor. You can kind of put some sealant on top that'll prevent it from getting worse, prevent mold from forming, prevent the water from leaking. So that's how I kind of think about the approach to the gut initially. So we have lots of different supplements that we use. This is just a few, but we basically want mucosal support and we want amino acid support. So we use a lot of glutamine, and then peptides can also help. So BPC is another one that can kind of help to heal that gut lining. So and then we need to look at like, why did it happen in the first place? And again, this is kind of the Band-Aid up there is to show that this is kind of a little bit of a Band-Aid. So it's not, if we don't address the underlying problems, then we're going to still have leaky gut. And I do get lots of people that start on these powders and they feel way better and they kind of want to stop doing any of the investigative work in terms of figuring out what is causing the leaky gut to begin with. And I always caution people from that, because what's going to happen then is that whatever underlying imbalances cause the leaky gut to begin with are still there. Okay. So people always wonder, how do I test my microbiome? How do you know that it's out of balance? So there's lots of different companies. This is just a few of them that we've used. I'm currently using something called GI Map from Diagnostic Solutions, and I like it because it's a PCR DNA test, and it's very specific. So basically you poop in a little fry container, and then you take little scoops from pieces of your poop, and then you put it into a little vial, and then you send it to the lab, and then it gives us a comprehensive report of what's happening in your microbiome. It tells us all of the good bacteria you have, all of the pathogenic bacteria. It also tests for things like fungi, parasites, worms, and then it also looks at immune function and gluten sensitivity, and also digestive function in terms of how are your enzymes. So it gives us a ton of information with one test. And then from there, we can tailor our treatment individually to you and what your body needs to get back in balance. So how do we do that? How do we treat the gut? So the overall principle of treating the gut is we want to remove the bad bacteria, we want to replace them with good bacteria and re-inoculate, we want to repair, and we want to rebalance. And the way I kind of look at this is, if you've got some people living in your house that are not great roommates or not great tenants, and they're causing damage to your house, you want to get them out. And the house in this case is our intestines. So we use herbal antimicrobial protocols for the most part to get rid of the bad bacteria. Now, the problem is when we use those protocols, the herbal antimicrobials do not discriminate. They will also kill good bacteria. So it's important that we are re-inoculating as well. One thing to mention is there's this thing called biofilm. So biofilm is basically like this mucus layer that lines our gut. And you can see in the little drawing on the right, it kind of protects the bacteria really in both of those drawings. And so if we just put herbal antimicrobials or any antimicrobials and we don't disrupt the biofilm, then all those little bacteria are kind of protected and hiding. So it's important that when we treat the gut that we first give biofilm disruptors to kind of release that mucus, and then we can actually get at the microbes. Because of this, it's important that we do some immune support. So you can imagine all those little bugs there in this drawing, and imagine if that little pill on the right, which it indicates an antibiotic, but imagine if it's disrupting the biofilm and then all of a sudden all those bugs are out there. then those bugs can actually cause infections if your immune system is not robust enough. The appendix is actually a little spot where the bugs hang out in between the small and large intestine, and it's lined, there's a bunch of biofilm in there. And so if you use a biofilm disruptor and you release a bunch of bugs and your immune system is not robust, it's possible you could cause something like an appendicitis or other infections. So we always want to give people immune support if their tests, if their GI map test indicates that their immune response is not robust enough. And there's lots of ways we do that, but one of them is peptide LL37. Okay, and then the next thing we want to do is as we're getting the bad bacteria out, we want to make sure that we're making the environment optimal for the good bacteria to be in there. So that's where we do mucosal support and then also enzymes to help digest the food. So and we'll talk about that more in a minute, but if we have undigested food going through the system, that's going to encourage bad bacteria to stay there. And then we want to invite new guests in. So we want to make sure that we have bacteria that are beneficial to us coming in. And so that's prebiotics and probiotics. So a lot of times people don't really understand the difference between prebiotics and probiotics. And the analogy I like to use is, which would you rather have in your backyard? Would you rather have hummingbirds or would you rather have rats? And in this analogy, the probiotics are hummingbirds or rats or rodents. So if you imagine in your backyard, you release a bunch of hummingbirds or you release a bunch of rodents, those are like the probiotics. So you're putting them out there, but if you just release them out there and you don't feed them, they're not going to stay there. So the prebiotics are the food. And interestingly enough, of course, if you put a hummingbird feeder in your backyard, but you don't actually release hummingbirds, probably over time, you're going to get hummingbirds there, even if you don't release them. Also, if you just release trash, if you put a bunch of trash in your backyard, you're probably going to get rodents, even if you don't release a bunch there. And so I think it's important to recognize, I think a lot of people know about probiotics, not as many people know about prebiotics. Prebiotics are probably more important than probiotics. So if you put the food out for whatever you want to be there, you're going to encourage them to come much more than if you just actually release whatever it is that you want to be there. So, and then long-term, what we always want to do long-term is move towards a healthy diet, healthy living that supports a healthy, in this case, microbiome. So the flowers, if you have a backyard with a bunch of flowers, but you don't have hummingbirds, maybe you put out, if you want to get them there the fastest, maybe you put out a hummingbird feeder and you release a bunch of hummingbirds. And then over time, maybe they just eat the flowers. If you have a lot of flowers, you don't even have to worry about the hummingbird feeder anymore. And so when we're talking about making sure that we're bringing good bacteria in, we want to be doing prebiotics and probiotics, a combination of both of them. And we look at your particular microbiome results to decide which probiotics and which prebiotics to give you, depending on what bacteria, maybe good bacteria are not at optimal levels. We might give you additional probiotics. Seed, which is the one listed here, is in the lower left-hand corner. It's a subscription that people get the probiotics sent to them every month. And it's a great way to kind of help make sure that you're getting all those healthy bugs in you. And I also just want to mention, I have no connection to any of these companies whatsoever. Okay. So then once we've put all these good bacteria in and we've kind of healed the gut lining with all the mucosal support, the next thing that we want to do is make sure that we're keeping that environment healthy. So that's where we go back to those 4 pillars of making sure we're getting enough sleep, making sure that we're eating a nutritious diet, making sure that we're getting enough exercise, and making sure that our stress levels are optimal. And so diet, in this case, we want as many vegetables as possible during a day and during a week. So rainbow vegetables. So if you're, you might hear, oh, cruciferous vegetables are great. So some people will just be eating broccoli every day. Eating broccoli every day is not bad, and it's certainly better than not eating any broccoli at all. But you want to be looking at all different colors. So the vegetables, the colors in the vegetables contain phytonutrients, which are kind of like little superpower molecules that help our body. So as many different vegetables and fruit as possible during the week and during the day is going to help. It's going to be like feeding all sorts of good, positive microbes in you, versus if you're eating processed foods, industrial seed oils, things like that. That's kind of like putting out the trash for the rodents. And then fermented foods as well. So again, long-term, we want to move towards you're living a healthy lifestyle and you're not taking a ton of supplements. And so fermented foods are a great way to get to kind of continue to inoculate your gut with a healthy microbiome. Okay, next thing we're going to talk about is what can you do today? So I would say at least probably 80% of people that I test have some sort of gut imbalance, probably even higher than that. And so my recommendation to pretty much everyone is test your gut to see what's going on. And the reason for that is if you have, for example, Giardia that's hanging out in there, you can do all the, like you can take probiotics, prebiotics, you can take some support, but if we don't give you something to actually treat the Giardia, things are never going to get in balance. So I think it's important to test first, see what's going on. And then while you're waiting to get the test, start taking some supportive supplements to support having those healthy microbiome organisms in there, and also to help heal the leaky gut. So all those powders that we talked about, prebiotics and probiotics, starting those kind of right away helps to get your gut in balance. One thing to mention is, imagine back to the analogy of if you have someone living, a roommate who's making a big mess, it's going to be kind of hard to get them out of the house. So it's the same idea. If you have some bacteria in you that are not healthy, as you start to change your microbiome, you could have all sorts of symptoms. So imagine that you have a bacteria living in you that's causing you to feel anxious. You don't realize this, but the bacteria is causing it. As you change the environment, as you kill that bacteria, as you starve it, if you don't give it the food that it likes, your anxiety can temporarily get much worse. And this can happen with all sorts of symptoms, pain, depression, et cetera, as the bacteria are dying off. So important to recognize that it's possible that you're going to feel a little worse before you feel better. And then the last thing that we're going to talk about are a couple cutting edge treatments that we do that can help your gut. So, and we have separate webinars on these, so I'm not going to get into too much detail about this, but we do stellate ganglion blocks, and we generally block the vagus nerve as well. And it's an injection in your neck. The procedure itself just takes about 5 minutes, and it's basically an autonomic nervous system reboot. So the way I think about it is, if you have a computer and you have too many apps open, you get that spinning wheel of death that just kind of freezes on you. You can reboot the computer, it closes all the unnecessary apps, and then when you open it up, things work better. So same thing, if our body gets stuck in flight, fight, and sympathetic all the time, it's really hard for us to heal. It's hard for our microbiome to be in balance. It's hard for us to digest our food. We want to be in parasympathetic, which is the rest and digest, as much as possible. And so one way that we can do it is with the autonomic nervous system reboot, the stellate ganglion block and the vagus block. And what it kind of does is it for most people is going to make the sympathetic nervous system calm down a bit, and it's going to make the parasympathetic more robust so you can digest your food better, your immune system works better, you're just going to be able to heal better. So I think this is after the past 2 years of the pandemic, almost everyone would benefit from these treatments. And I also, just to mention, I've done all these treatments myself. I worked night shifts and shift work in the ER for many, many years and did a really good job of disrupting my microbiome and my autonomic nervous system. So I can say from personal experience that these things do work. They do take time though. So the microbiome protocols, they don't work overnight. It's a process. All right. So thanks for listening. And now what I'd love is everyone to put in the chat box what symptoms can be caused by a disrupted microbiome. And then I'll give everyone a minute or so here. And then Em is hosting this, and Em's gonna just kind of give some summaries of what people said before and after. And then we'll open it up to any questions as well.
Great. And I can see as these results are coming in, or as these answers are coming in, we've got a question. Will this be recorded? Yes, this will be recorded and it'll be available on the website. And we've got some lovely contributions to the chat here. I'm going to read some of them out. We got stress, bloating, diarrhea, fatigue, low nutrient absorption, nausea, allergies, brain fog, GI discomfort, stress, autoimmunity, anxiety, depression, joint pain, migraines, poor memory, GI discomfort, anxiety, cramping. Yeah, lovely. Nice work, everyone.
Yeah, so pretty much anything can be caused by a disrupted microbiome. So nice work on that. And then curious if there are any questions that I can answer.
Yeah, we have a few here. The first one is, do you treat H. pylori?
Yep, that's a great question. Kind of as I mentioned earlier on, H. pylori is upstream. And what I've noticed with a lot of people is people will get microbiome tests from kind of direct to consumer companies that don't seem to be as sensitive for H. pylori, and they've tried various gut protocols and it doesn't work. And the test that we do is more sensitive for H. pylori. And a lot of times when we treat the H. pylori, it kind of helps everything downstream. And the reason for that is when people have H. pylori in their stomach, it usually actually decreases the stomach acid, which is going to make us not digest things very well. And it's also not going to make us not kill pathogens as well. So we have staph and strep that just live on our body all the time. So we're eating it all the time, and the hydrochloric acid in our stomach should kill it so it doesn't end up hanging out in our intestines. But when we have H. pylori, those bugs can make it down into the intestines and cause all sorts of imbalances down there. So the short answer is yes, we treat it all the time. And I found that it's not uncommon that people have tried lots of different things, and it's because they haven't addressed the H. pylori. And then once we address that, we can get things in balance.
Great, thank you for that. We also have a question, just wanting a bit more information about how you approach gut health in support of managing allergies. Oh
yeah, that's a great question. So kind of back to that leaky gut, where if you have two different cells, that little core that I mentioned from the mouth to the anus, that is basically the outside of the body separating from the inside of the body. And we have one layer of cells, those cells that we showed about with leaky gut. And if those cells are loose at all, then what's going to happen is stuff is going to get into our bloodstream and cause us to react. And so whether it's seasonal allergies or specific allergies to things like pets or mold or whatever, whenever that gut is permeable, we're going to be much more likely to get allergies. So by healing that gut, then it protects us so that all those pathogens are not getting into our bloodstream. I guess I shouldn't even say pathogens, all those irritants, all those things that you can potentially be reactive to. And so what I've found again and again is that when we treat people's gut and get the microbiome in balance and treat the leaky gut, that allergies get much, much better. And allergies are kind of like the first step to autoimmunity. You can imagine if your body's overreacting to various triggers over time, that can lead to the immune system being out of balance and attacking itself.
Great, wonderful. And thanks to everyone who's contributing these really thoughtful questions. We won't get to all of them, but keep putting them in the chat and they'll help inform future webinars. So thanks for those. So our next, there are a number of questions here about the nuts and bolts of gut treatment protocols. How much does it cost? How long does a typical protocol take? And how long between doing the protocol and symptoms resolving? People wanting to know, when will I feel better?
Yeah, those are all great questions. So we look at each person, we practice what's called precision medicine. So we look at each person individually. So if I have 5 people that all have H. pylori, they're going to get different protocols just depending on what else is going on in their microbiome, how their immune support or how their immune system is doing, if they have what else they have going on in the microbiome. So it's not really a one size fits all in terms of how long it takes or how much it's going to cost. Generally speaking, for something like H. pylori, it's a month-long protocol, and then we're going to retest. And that's something important to think about with all this is we always want to retest, because a lot of times with just all those supportive supplements that I was talking about, the mucosal support, a lot of times people's symptoms are going to feel better, but we want to make sure that we actually got the microbiome back into balance. And then, so for H. pylori, it'd be 1 month and then a month off, retest, and then do another protocol, assuming the H. pylori is gone, for the dysbiosis, which would be another month or two, kind of depending on what's going on with that individual microbiome. If someone has something like worms or Giardia, something like that, we're always going to treat that first, similar to H. pylori, and then treat the other dysbiosis that's as a result of that downstream. I would say, as a general rule, it's about 4 months from the time that you start a protocol to the time that we retest it. And then when we retest it, depending on what we find, you might need to do another protocol that maybe is not as long. I would say for most people, it's not a one and done. It's gonna be a process. It's taken oftentimes decades to get the microbiome out of balance, and there's no quick way to get it into balance. I hope in the future fecal transplants will be more accessible. Right now, there's still too many risks with them, so we can't do that. But it does take a process, and I would say, in terms of the cost, that's going to also depend on, what immune support we need, what products we're using, but probably somewhere between $500 to $1,000 for all the supplements. And it is a lot of supplements. It's definitely a commitment. And so I always tell people, like, make sure that you're going to do it when you have the time and the bandwidth to actually stick with it, because similar to taking regular antibiotics, pharmaceuticals, if you just take them for a few days and then you stop, that can actually cause the bacteria to be stronger effectively, because you've killed the weaker ones and then the stronger ones can multiply. So you want to definitely stick with it.
Thanks. I love this next question. How does exercise impact microbiome?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think it works in both directions. So the microbiome, if it causes you to be inflamed, is going to make you more in pain. You're not going to want to exercise. And then exercising itself is going to provide kind of a happy environment for the microbiome. So all those 4 pillars: exercise, stress, sleep, and healthy diet, those are all going to make a happy home for supportive microorganisms to live in your gut.
Great. This next question. Oh, go ahead.
One thing I was just going to add to that is, one thing that I run into a lot in Moab and in the Tetons is people over-exercise. So there is too much of everything. So too much exercise is actually really harmful to the microbiome. We know that people that do ultra marathons, things like that, or even just a marathon, there's bleeding that happens in the gut mucosa. It's incredibly inflammatory. So that's something that I have conversations with people about a lot. If your goal is longevity, you probably only want to be exercising 45 minutes to an hour. And you want to have, most people based on their genomics probably want to take a couple of days off a week. If your goal is that you want to train for some, big, long event, or you like to do long things, just recognize that that is harming your microbiome, and it's also harming your longevity.
Great, thanks for that clarification. And this is probably our last question. What about COVID and microbiome?
Oh yeah, that's a great question. So we've noticed that long haul COVID in particular is associated with inflammation and all sorts of kind of root causes that cause imbalances in our body. And the microbiome is also part of that. And so if people have disrupted microbiomes, they're less likely to be able to kind of get rid of the COVID symptoms, and they end up developing more of long haul symptoms. In terms of like whether you're going to get COVID or not, or whether you're going to really get symptoms at all, same thing. If you have a robust microbiome and a robust gut immune system, and you have those tight junctions are tight and you don't have leaky gut, you're much less likely to develop infections in general, including COVID. Great question.
Wonderful. And we're coming up on our time. So I just want to thank everyone who engaged in the chat, who asked questions, who offered input. Really appreciate all of that. And thanks to Dr. Mulcahy for this webinar. See you all next month.
Thanks, everyone.